This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I am joined today by Dr. Jake Jacobs. Jake, thanks for being with us.
Hello, Duke.
Always good to see you, my friend. And we have a couple of good stories, I think, that are going to challenge and enlighten you. And let's start with the first one. Is it my imagination, or are they coming after DeSantis so much that he is the one they fear the most? Is that fair to say, the left?
Well, if it's not, it's a close tie between him and Donald Trump. There's no doubt about it. He's speaking the truth. He's going after the woke curricula big time, and they want him finished. They want him out.
So dangerous is DeSantis that the, let's just say, morally loose Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, has decided that she's going to take him on directly. She's attacking his curriculum and lying about it. Now, this is with regard to Black history. You may recall that there was an African-American AP course in the high schools in Florida, and it was completely Marxist, completely radically anti-American, Black Lives Matter, Marxist garbage. All that the Florida legislature did, led by DeSantis, was to reject most of that radical anti-Americanism and to try to focus on actual history. The history of Black people in this country and the history of slavery is exceedingly well covered in these programs. But the left is not happy. And so we're going to show a couple videos, Jake, and I want you to expand upon this, all right?
Sounds good.
First video is Kamala attacking DeSantis.
In the state of Florida, they decided middle school students will be taught that enslaved people benefited from slavery. They insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, and we will not stand for it. They want to replace history with lies. How is it that anyone could suggest that in the midst of these atrocities, that there was any benefit to being subjected to this level of dehumanization?
First of all, cover the lie there, Jark. Jake, what's the great big lie we just heard from Kamala Harris?
This is just unbelievable. The Democratic Party is the party of slavery, systemic institutionalized racism, Jim Crow, black codes, lynching, and on and on and on. The fact of the matter is they are not teaching about slavery in Florida. She is the one who is lying through her teeth.
I can't believe she used the word gaslighting. That the entire Biden administration is one great big gaslight. But let's be very more specific about this. So basically, one sentence in the entire African-American curriculum suggested that some slaves benefited to some degree. So, for instance, these were African slaves that did not read. They were brought over here without language. The African cultures were oral cultures. They didn't read and write. And so one of the things that they sometimes got was educated.
And by the way, just for the record, Frederick Douglass, the brilliant Frederick Douglass, who said that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was magnificent, which he read over and over and over and studied over and over and over, he himself said one of the positive things that came out of slavery was the fact that I learned how to read. It wasn't, in essence, advancing or advocating for slavery, but he was saying there was some good that came out of it. By the way, one real quick thing. When Muhammad Ali was over in the Rumble in the Jungle, 1974, I was a freshman in college. We watched it like crazy. He came back from Zaire, which is now, I think, the Congo, and the reporter said to him, "Hey, what was it like? Are you glad to be home?" He goes, "Thank God my granddaddy got on that boat." And he hated slavery, but what he was saying is the fact is my ancestors, I live in the United States of America, a great republic where I was able to become a multi-millionaire in a wonderful society.
And the fake outrage from Kamala Harris, Jake, it's one sentence. And like you gave us multiple examples of, all they were suggesting is that the slaves were not, and I make this point with my university kids, the most expensive thing you often owned when you were a slave owner was your slaves. They cost a lot of money. The idea that the slave owners were destroying, murdering them, killing them is completely stupid. I mean, that was your resource, right? That doesn't mean that slavery is good.
Right.
No one's arguing that slavery has a silver lining. It's just pointing out the absolute truth. I remember, 15 years ago, Dinesh D'Souza wrote a wonderful article, and I urge you to find it online. It's basically called Two Cheers for Colonialism. Now, of course, Dinesh is Indian.
He was making reference to the British Empire. Yes.
Now, this was an Indian culture before the British came, where there was no democracy,
caste system,
where you had and no one ever talks about this.
Yes.
You think the West was bad? The 1,000-year-old caste system. You had a handful of Brahmins, and then everybody else was quite literally untouchable. This is the same caste system where wives had to throw themselves on the funeral pyres of their dead husbands. No one talks about that. And so, D'Souza, I really urge you to look up this article again. Two Cheers for Colonialism. Not three, two. How much progress the Indian people made under the British rule. That's not a justification for colonization. It's simply pointing out reality.
And by the way, it's interesting to note Mahatma Gandhi would not have gotten away with his passive resistance. Passive resistance in, let's say, Berlin, Nazi Germany, or in Moscow, Soviet Union.
You mean the same Gandhi who told the Jews during the Holocaust to just surrender and die?
Yes.
That Gandhi?
Yes, that
I just
Gandhi.
want to make sure to talk about the same guy. And
but the
point
is the support of the British Empire within its colonial parliamentary democratic structure.
That's right. Yeah. And women's rights and democracy. All those things became part and parcel of what the British left behind. And so before we get too far into this, now let's look at William Allen, Dr. William Allen, who is pushing back an African-American who helped write the standards that Kamala is lying about. Here's what he has to say in an interview on Fox News.
Tell her right now what specifically this component of the slavery course teaches.
Well, permit me to have Frederick Douglass tell her. He wrote an autobiography in which he described how the mistress of his slave owner began to teach him to read. She pulled back the curtain through which a glimmer of light shone before the master forced her to close it. But that glimmer of light was enough for Frederick Douglass to illumine a bright flame that he exploited to his benefit and his country's benefit thereafter. Such examples are numerous, and they are retailed in the stories of people who suffered the indignity of slavery time and again. And quickly, permit me to say, what this curriculum is about is having people who live the experience, who live the history, tell their stories. And nothing is more important than that we never, ever erase the stories that the people who live the stories tell. No one has a right to interpret before first understanding the stories as the people who lived them understood them themselves.
That is powerful. Notice what you said. You brought up Frederick Douglass, and what Dr. Allen said is exactly correct. These are the words of Frederick Douglass. No one gets to interpret them. Black Lives Matter. Kamala Harris, with all of her vacuousness.
Angela Davis.
They do not have the right to cover those voices. And what was Frederick Douglass saying? That the slave mistress opened a flame for him in showing him how to read, and that began a lifelong, remarkable life. That's all it was.
One of the most brilliant minds in American history. By the way, speaking of brilliant minds in American history, William Allen was on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Oh, and by the way, he doesn't fit the PC because he's black. He's a black American who loves this republic, loves our Constitution. And by the way, he was a colleague. He worked with Robert Woodson, who's put together 1776 Unites. And he's written the book Red, White, and Black, Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. All the authors, all the writers in this book are black Americans who love this country.
After the break, we are going to pick this topic up because there's a lot more bone to be chewed here. We'll see you shortly. Back with Jake Jacobs, and we're talking about this remarkable story about how the left is going after DeSantis for what's going on in the teaching of the African-American curriculum in schools in Florida. We've already demonstrated clearly that the left is lying. They are gaslighting. This is a very uplifting curriculum, and it's all about the history of slavery. It does not stint on the evils of slavery. It simply allows people who survived slavery, like Frederick Douglass, to talk about it, right? To not censor Douglass, who made the argument that for all the evils of slavery, there was his ability to learn how to read, which was taught to by his slave master. So the left has lost their mind here, Jake. But this is, again, the word that Kamala Harris used was gaslighting. I mean, this is real gaslighting, isn't it? Lying about this curriculum.
It's the inversion and perversion of truth and reality. Look, when Donald Trump, through the influence of Christopher Rufo, who's an expert on critical race theory, when Rufo exposed the racism of critical race theory, the Marxism of critical theory, in essence influenced Donald Trump on the federal level to, in essence, stop critical race theory, immediately the Kamala Harrises of the world, what did they say? Oh, you don't want the kids to learn about slavery. You don't want the kids to learn about systemic institutionalized racism. That is a lie. The fact of the matter is the individuals that Donald Trump brought into that commission, many of them being black American scholars, said, no, we want to just make sure that there's a balanced presentation of the actual truth of American history. And by the way, it's very interesting because if you go back into the study of textbooks, Democratic textbooks in the state of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, up till the 1960s, early 70s, guess what? They were the ones whitewashing slavery, Jim Crow, black codes, etc., and saying slavery, to quote John C. Calhoun, was a positive force, a positive thing. So the fact of the matter is these people are inverting truth. They're twisting history, and bottom line is they're just simply lying.
Lying. And Dr. Allen also said this about his curriculum. The only criticism I've encountered so far is a single one, which was articulated by the vice president, which was an error, as I stated in my response to the vice president. That is the only thing that's been challenged. And it shows you how the paucity of evidence that the left has. It's that one line. That one suggestion. And what's really ironic and dangerous about this is a curriculum that will teach white kids and black kids and Hispanic kids and Asian kids about slavery and the black experience with great depth, with great meaning. It no way whitewashes slavery. So the left is coming after this simply because it's not socialist and Marxist enough.
Correct. And also they know that if it bleeds racially, it leads, and therefore they're relying once again on and pigeonholing all conservatives, Christians, Republicans as being racist. It's a lie from the pit of Gehenna.
Since we're talking about gaslighting and the levels to which the progressive forces in this country have elevated gaslighting to the main discourse of progressivism. Very little fact, very little demonstrable truth in what the left is telling us, but a whole lot of gaslighting. We got to go back to make another example of this. California. We saw last week, Jake, that California is actually going backwards on protecting sex trafficking. We talked about how the progressive left is now going after the movie, right? The movie, The Sound of Freedom. Yeah.
Yes.
And how could you possibly be against rescuing kids from sex trafficking? But the left is doing it. Now we have a California assemblyman who speaks out vocally amid the outrage over child sex trafficking laws and why, in his words, why in the world would his California legislative peers refuse to make this a serious felony in California.
What's bizarre is when it first was in committee in the Senate, 6 of the Democrats went, no, we can't have a law against this. We have to be able to rehabilitate these purveyors of sex trafficking. This is unbelievable. They said, well, it's because if you get 3 felonies, you spend the rest of your life in prison and we have to rehabilitate. That was their argument till all of a sudden, even moderate Democrats in California began to go, are you kidding me? And even Governor Newsom, who knows there's a possibility he could be the nominee for the president of the United States in 2024, he said, we've got to go along with this.
Well, there's gaslighting. And I know that if Newsom wasn't considering a run for president, and look, let's be very clear. If Biden either chooses not to run or is unable to run, the person they're going to turn to is Gavin Newsom. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Nobody else is even in the same room. That's what's going to happen. And so the idea that Gavin Newsom is doing this out of principle, that he suddenly is concerned about sex trafficking in California, that suddenly, all of a sudden, Newsom is willing to stand up to the LGBTQ activists who don't like this movie. Yeah, this is complete gaslighting. He knows that if he's going to become president, he can't just win California. And he's going to lose most states if his assembly can't even be bullied into turning sex trafficking into a serious felony.
And he has to BS his way into the moderate world, so to speak. You know, we have some clips here. This, to me, it's just absolutely bizarre. But left-wing, like magazines or newspapers like The Guardian, Rolling Stone, Washington Post. Look at this from The Guardian, Duke. Sound of Freedom, the QAnon, adjacent thriller seducing America. What's the one from we have the one from, look at the Rolling Stone, a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. Do we have the one from the Watch? Look at this. QAnon and Sound of Freedom both rely on tired Hollywood tropes. This is disgusting.
Yeah, it's a Hollywood trope that rescuing children is a heroic act. You know what? If the main character wasn't white, if he was black, the left would be all over this.
Absolutely. And by the way, the movie was actually made like 2 or 3 years ago. Nobody would take it, right? The word
Disney.
QAnon didn't even exist. This is the whole, if you understand historical context, this is why these left-wing, this media, these activists disgust me. This is something that everybody left and right and everybody in between should be on board with.
For 5 years, the Disney Corporation owned and commissioned this movie. They sat on it, they sat on it, they sat on it. They didn't want to release it. And when they finally let go of it, they still didn't want it released. This is the progressive left. Now, you got to help me out, Jake. I realize there's absolutely no connection, but explain briefly what QAnon is and how in the world the left argues it has anything to do with this movie.
Well, I got to tell you the truth. When this was coming down during COVID and I was getting a bunch of individuals sending me information, is it some kind of a conspiracy theory where Robert Kennedy Jr. was working in collusion with Hillary Clinton and it was this big conspiracy of a central government takeover of the country? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the word racism. It means whatever you want it to mean at the time you use it, right? The left is so good about this. Speaking of gaslighting, words, they throw words around that don't mean anything, but those words can be used to make one point or its opposite. It's completely crazy. It's like the word racism, right? Racism now is anything the left doesn't like. Gender fluid is another one of those words, right? And so QAnon is one of them, right? It's just meant to be. It may as well be the new Nazi, right?
Right.
If Nazi is wearing thin, the left can't really support the argument anymore, and too many high school kids no longer even know what the Nazis were.
But how does it make sense that individuals like is his name Tim Ballard, who
right.
That they are actually devoting their lives to saving children from the sex trafficking that's flooding over, no thanks to Joe Biden and the southern border? How does it make sense that they would fight this and somehow this left-wing media, who they call themselves liberal, which isn't really true, they're hardcore leftist radicals, why would they actually do the QAnon thing? If QAnon means that you're a fascist or a Nazi or you're a conspiracy nut job, this is anchored in historical reality. This is factual information. Why be against it? It makes no sense in my mind.
Well, I think there's one reason. There's only one reason the left is bothered by this, because it undermines the new pedophilia, right? This undermines the LGBTQ commitment to empowering children to choose to have sex, even with adults. That's, I think, is what's happening.
Duke, this is demonic. This is satanic. Demonic. I mean, we have to just say it like it is.
That's why I said a moment ago, the only reason that Newsom decided to stand up to the left on this and to stand athwart of the LGBTQ is because he wants to be president. Look, we've said this many times on this show. Why are you sexualizing children in elementary school, middle school? Why are we turning children into highly, highly sexualized beings? Well, the obvious answer is so they can have sex, right? The idea that we're teaching the kids this at 5 and 7 and 9, and then turning around and telling those kids, oh, and by the way, you got to wait 10 more years before you can do it. No, they're already trying to liberate children sexually so they can choose to have sex with adults. And remember, the UN a couple of weeks ago released a report in which they argued that when pedophilia, children having sex with adults, and the law came into contact with each other, the consent of the child, consent of a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old, is more important than the law. And so you can see where this is heading and what's happening here. And so the only reason Newsom got involved is because he knows this is going to hurt his his chances to become president in most other states. But with regards to California, he thinks exactly the same way as these leftists do. And the Rolling Stone. I would be remiss to not throw this out there. This is the same Rolling Stone magazine that believed the lies of the Duke rape and the Virginia rape cases, could immediately jump to gaslighting conclusions about how privileged white boys raping black women. The whole thing was a complete and utter lie. And of course, they paid very little price for those lies.
You know, Duke, as I'm sitting here listening to you just explain this, the whole history of the sexual revolution, the Wilhelm Reiches of the world, the Kinseys, the Herbert Marcuses, the Sigmund Freud's polymorphous perversity, all these things are flooding into my head because they understood that the way to destroy our republic under God, our nation under God, is to go through a perversity of sexuality. And I guess in my world, I just never thought in the world of normalcy and decency and honor that children, they would go for our children at this level. This makes me want to vomit, to be quite honest.
The person we're talking about here is Assemblyman Tom Lackey in California, who is the one that is outraged by what's happening here. And he goes through the story like we just did, talking about why the left didn't want to vote for it. He says, quote, of his progressive peers, he says, quote, their argument is that stronger penalties don't do anything in the way of reformation and get people to change, Lackey said. But what it does do, and what they don't address, it holds people accountable for serious sexual offenses. It's part of the accountability process. Victims getting completely forgotten in their minds. Victims become irrelevant, and the focus becomes entirely on the offender, not on justice. And that's exactly right. You're seeing this in Illinois and New York, all of this cashless bail now, right? You do a horrible offense. You rape, you kill, you rob, arson. We can't even expect you to have to put up bail because that's racist now. They arrest you and you're on the street in a few hours. This is exactly the worldview that Assemblyman Lackey is talking about.
Duke, when I was, as you know, down on the border here, and I've got a series coming out called American Crisis at the Border, and I'm interviewing from Pinal County Lieutenant Chris Lepre, and he was showing us the sites where not only the fentanyl, the drugs, but where the human trafficking, where the young girls were brought in, and he was telling us story upon rape. And by the way, this Tim Ballard from Sound of Freedom, he's putting much of the blame on Biden's borderless policies that are exasperating this problem, and that's coming all the way up into Green Bay, Wisconsin, Fargo, North Dakota, and all around, and Buffalo, New York, and all around the country, and it must be stopped.
Well, the good news is because of the intervention of Newsom and the really negative press, they managed to pass something watered down, but they at least rectified their mistake. But don't forget that when Newsom is the Democrat candidate for president, don't forget it. That's going to wrap up the show.
With Hillary as his VP.
Yeah.
Oh, not Hillary, Michelle Obama.
Oh, Newsom and Obama. Wow. That's going to wrap up the show. If you have any questions, comments, or want to support the show in any way, simply visit drdukeshow.com. For all of us at the Dr. Duke Show and for Jake Jacobs, thanks. We will see you again next week.